Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Tales of Suspense 43, cover dated July of 1963. This issue marks the first appearance of obscure villain Kala, and was written by Stan Lee and Robert Bernstein, drawn by Don Heck, inked by Dick Ayers, and lettered by Art Simek. Our issue opens up with a striking splash page, one remarkably similar to the cover. It's teasing our hero's coming confrontation with Kala, Queen of the Netherworld. Yet before we can witness this showdown, we must first travel to an experimental wind tunnel at one of Tony Stark's private laboratories. It's being used to test a powerful missile, and all seems to be going well. But one of its velocity control panels then suddenly explodes. Without the panel, the tunnel malfunctions and begins producing tornado force winds that rip the missile off of its mounts. Thus the weapon barrels out of the tunnel and smashes into a nearby mountain. A guard then races to inform Tony Stark of the chaos, as he's the inventor of the wind tunnel, but is away in a private office. Stark listens to the guard's plea over the phone, but realizes there's nothing he can do about it. Yet Iron Man can, so he tells the guard that the hero had been visiting him, and that he'll be sending him over to help. Unknown to the guard and everyone else, Tony Stark actually is Iron Man. Thus the inventor hurriedly changes into his armor and rushes to stop the tunnel. When he arrives, its powerful winds seem to have no effect on him, allowing him to walk inside and turn himself into a human fan. The tunnel can't handle the added force and thus explodes. Amazingly, Iron Man emerges from it completely unharmed and then quickly leaves to change back into Tony Stark. He returns to the scene in his civilian identity, but notably without his armor, which he usually collapses into a briefcase that he carries with him at all times. But in any case, we next see him as he's in conversation with a pair of guards. Yet as they're speaking, one of the guards suddenly vanishes out of thin air. The only thing that remains is his gun, which is suspiciously left behind. A nearby scientist then rushes to see what happened, but is immediately vanished as well. Stark has barely any time to process what's happening, as he inexplicably finds himself trapped within a transparent cage. It then begins sinking into the ground, as he desperately tries to escape. Yet the cage's material seems to be indestructible, as a guard and a scientist fail to break it with a sledgehammer, or even a gun. Thus Stark sinks below the surface of the Earth, and eventually finds himself in a strange underground city at the center of the planet. There, he's greeted by an oddly dressed woman who introduces herself as Kala, Queen of the Netherworld. She's the leader of this secret civilization, and was responsible for the vanishing of the guard and scientist. Yet they were abducted in error, as he was the true target. Thus it becomes obvious that Kala's people are not simple cave dwellers, but an incredibly advanced society. She explains that they are actually descendants of the legendary Atlanteans. Yet when their mythic land sank to the bottom of the ocean, they were shielded by an unbreakable glass dome. But over the ages their city continued to sink, until now when it's rested on Earth's core. Stark is fascinated by the tale, but still wonders why he's been brought there. Kala decries that it's time for her people to invade the surface, and thus offers to demonstrate the fearsome power of her mighty arsenal. But Stark turns it down, and questions how she'll bring the weapons to the surface. Thus she finally explains why he's been abducted, as only his transistor-powered machines are capable of blasting a path to the surface. He must either build a device to transport their weapons, or be executed, along with the guard and scientist. Yet Stark disregards the threat, and warns her of the power of the surface's greatest defender, Iron Man. He claims that the hero can effortlessly sink a battleship, down a supersonic jet, and destroy a space missile. Kala's chief general, Baksu, recommends that she heed Stark's warning, as he's been monitoring the surface and can confirm these impressive feats. But a prideful Kala disregards Baksu's advice, as she claims to possess a weapon that can reverse the Earth's axis, causing massive upheaval on the surface while leaving her netherworld unscathed. It's then that the abducted scientist speaks up and implores Stark to refuse his aid. After all, what are 3 lives compared to that of the entire planet? Yet shockingly, Stark agrees to help, but demands an array of scientific equipment and complete privacy. The scientist then curses Stark for betraying humanity, but the inventor callously brushes it off. Instead, he follows Baksu to his new laboratory, but along the way asks him why he's so hesitant to invade, unlike Kala. Baksu explains that he's unsure if the invasion will even succeed, and that he hates taking orders from a woman, yet still secretly loves her. But the issue then shifts forward later that evening, as Stark is diligently working in his private laboratory. But of course he's not building a tunneling device for Kala, but a copy of his Iron Man suit. Thus the next morning he's finished his armor and powerfully bursts out of the laboratory. Baksu is there waiting for him, but is easily subdued by the hero. Yet it should be noted that to protect his true identity, Iron Man claims that Stark had secretly escaped back to the surface, and had then sent him down to foil the invasion. Regardless, a defeated Baksu then prepares to be slain at Iron Man's hands. But the hero refuses and claims that Stark had spoken well of him, and that he should be the leader of the Netherworld instead of Kala. It seems that Baksu agrees, as he allows Iron Man to continue on with his quest to defeat her. Yet he warns the hero to not underestimate her power, as his strength may not be enough to save him from her terrifying weaponry. Yet the hero's strength is only the most obvious of his powers, as he secretly possesses many hidden abilities, those which he's confident can defeat Kala. Thus he rushes off to confront the villain, who's learned of his arrival and has ordered a soldier to blast him with a disintegration cannon. Iron Man walks right into its bolt's path, but just before it hits him, he retrieves a device that shoots out a reverse energy beam. It deflects the bolt back at the cannon, which completely destroys the weapon. Kala then orders for Iron Man to be incinerated by a massive fire tank, but the hero simply tosses a special crystal at its flame that chemically transforms it into ice. Undeterred, she next orders for him to be blown apart by a machine gun that fires magnetically guided atomic bullets. Yet Iron Man easily foils this attempt as well, as he simply tosses aside several flying magnets, which lead the bullets away from him and into the glass dome above. But now it's his turn to attack, as he releases countless tiny mirrors that create multiple illusory duplicates. The images disorient Kala and give him an opportunity to grab a hold of her. He then flies up and crashes through the supposedly unbreakable glass dome. Somehow he's able to then pull out a massive pair of nuclear-powered clippers, which gouge out a path to the surface. As the pair then arrive topside, Kala discovers that the surface's foreign atmosphere has turned her into an old and decrepit hag. Yet it's not just her, as Iron Man reveals that all of her people would instantly grow old and weak on the surface. Thus Kala realizes that her invasion is doomed to fail, and she begs Iron Man to return her to her home, where she'll be young and beautiful again. The hero obliges, as we next see the pair joined by Baksu in the Netherworld. There, she thanks Iron Man for returning her, pledges to free the garden scientist, and begs him to stay where he can rule by her side. But the hero rejects the offer, instead presenting Baksu as a far more worthy king. The gracious general then thanks Iron Man, and tells him that he's always welcome in the Netherworld. But of course he must return to the surface. Thus the issue subsequently ends as we see Tony Stark enjoying himself at a cocktail party. One of the guests remarks that if anything good came of his underground adventure, it was his separation from all of the beautiful women who clamor for him. Stark overhears this and chuckles at the joke, if only because he knows how wrong it is. That concludes the Iron Man story in Tales of Suspense 43, and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a fairly average and unremarkable story. Nothing was particularly bad about it, but at the same time nothing really sticks out to me either, except for its rather goofy nature. I can appreciate that Iron Man was placed in a new environment against eccentric foes, but their evil plot was rather straightforward, and somewhat derivative of the Fantastic Four villain Mole Man. But in any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.